I'm Catherine Nelson, and I've worked with the National Center for Literacy Education for about 4 years, doing research on literacy change and the impact of teacher collaboration. I was involved in designing this survey and doing the data analysis related to it. So let's jump into our findings. Looking beyond all of the external political controversy that surrounds standards, the overall picture found by NCLE research is one of quiet progress in schools going about the day-to-day business of integrating new literacy standards into teaching and learning. Our survey is consistent with many other national studies, including those conducted by the two major teachers' unions, in finding that about 75% of teachers support the substance of the new literacy standards. We wanted to go deeper and focus our analysis on places where teachers reported implementation was going well and benefiting students. What are those schools doing to prepare and support their teachers? We found that schools where implementation is strongest invest in building the professional capacity of their staff, cultivate teacher ownership for change, and view standards implementation as a collective learning process. First, some overall data about progress in standards implementation. Since our 2013 study, teacher support for the standards has increased from 65% to 78%. Look especially at the difference in strong agreement to the statement, new literacy standards will help improve instruction and classroom practice. In addition to support for the content of the standards, 69% of teachers agree that actual implementation is going well in their schools. Perhaps most importantly, the number who see positive impacts on students outweighs those who report negative impacts, almost 7 to 1. What's working well in those schools where teachers agree most strongly that implementation is going well and benefiting students? We used the survey responses to create a profile of what we call strong implementation schools, defined by the criteria you see here. So these are places where teachers agreed most strongly that the standards are a positive change, that implementation is going well at their school, that they personally feel well prepared to teach the standards, and that so far it's having positive impact on their students. When we focused on those schools where implementation was going best, a distinct blueprint emerged of how they're approaching standards implementation. In every aspect of school functioning, from leadership to assessment to curriculum and instruction, strong implementation schools seem to take an approach to the new standards distinctly different from schools where implementation is going less well. The unifying thread of successful approaches is that standards implementation is treated as an organizational learning opportunity. Every element of their strategy focuses on finding ways for educators to work together to build, share, and refine their expertise. I especially want to emphasize the collective aspect of that. Our research suggests that the schools having most success with this don't just invest in teacher learning, they invest in teachers learning and building things together. In the box on the left, we name some of the specific conditions and practices that seem to make a difference. Schools taking a capacity-building approach have a clear vision for where they're going with literacy change, but that vision is built collectively with teacher ownership. Leaders support teacher learning not only by providing time for teacher collaboration, but by learning alongside them. Perhaps most important is what they do with that time. We have identified in this research a number of tasks that get teachers deeply engaged in analyzing and building curriculum, and that turns out to relate strongly to how well they say standards implementation is going. In the next few slides, I'll provide a couple of examples from the report of the kind of differences that capacity-building conditions can make. This chart groups teachers by whether their schools protect time for collaboration, and then looks at how well prepared they feel to teach the standards and the extent of the instructional shifts they're making. Teachers who feel best prepared to teach the standards and report the most substantial shifts in their practice have had time and support to learn about, practice, and reflect on instructional shifts with their colleagues in an environment of collaboration and inquiry. Clearly, strong implementation schools find and protect the time for teachers to work together. Setting aside the time, however, is necessary but not sufficient. How the time is used is also critical. NCLE research pinpoints specific collaborative practices that support the kinds of deep understanding and ownership needed to bring about lasting classroom change. This chart shows how often teachers in strong and weak implementation schools have opportunities to engage in some of those specific powerful collaborative practices, discussing professional reading or research, co-creating lessons, and jointly analyzing student work products that result. Although much of the controversy around standards has really been about how they're assessed, we found that even the assessments are viewed significantly more positively at schools taking a capacity-building approach. This chart looks specifically at teacher ownership, and we defined that by collaboratively developed priorities, decisions that draw on teacher expertise, and teachers having influence over their own professional learning. And it shows agreement with items about the new literacy tests in high ownership schools versus low ownership schools. Why does that matter? In schools where assessments are seen as well aligned with what is actually taught and as being fair measures of student learning, they're more likely to be seen as useful input and feedback in the teaching and learning process. In summary, we found that capacity-driven schools use all the building blocks of literacy change differently. Specifically, we looked at how strong implementation schools are supporting their teachers in terms of curriculum, instruction, assessment, professional learning, and leadership. Over the next 6 months, we'll be releasing a series of focus papers looking at how schools where standards implementation is going well approach each of these elements.